as far as agenda today, of course, we all read the Basque book, but Tony, you said you also had an update on the Koçma talent, right?
Oh, I mean, I should really yeah, yes, the update is they did the initial reveal of the Koçma tablet and a kind of preliminary linguistic analysis of the entirety of it this morning, like an hour ago, they finished. And so uh, basically the things that I said when we talked about it, I mean, I kind of need to digest it. But the things that we basically said when you and I talked about this for a couple months ago or something, was it? I don't really remember. We're basically almost all confirmed.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So, you have a Hittite ritual and breaking bread and pouring stuff out, and then a ritual practitioner comes forward, or someone comes forward and sort of incants either kalismi or sorry, or either kalasmi or kalasmili. Maybe we should read possibly you'd have to amend the text slightly. And so, yeah, in the language of Kalasma, and then you have some stuff, and it seems to follow the structure of these sort of a known structure of that we find in Hittite rituals and Luvian rituals and Palaic rituals. So it's like a known Anatolian kind of ritual structure, and that helps us kind of guide us to some interpretations and the features of the language. They 100% agree with like the little hint in the initial release. It definitely looks very much like Luvian, but also differs in enough crucial features that like it has things like eye mutation and
Oh,
um, and that are just like these are the sort of most important. So it has a nominative plural for in Inzi, and that is like that looks very very Luvian. Also, well, obviously also shared with Lishan, and so but then there's other things where it mismatches these languages in really interesting ways. So
oh.
it's I would say it's completely tantalizing and yeah, we should talk about it, I guess, in more detail. I don't know, once I've kind of had a chance to digest all of it. But maybe I'll just flag this. Oh, sorry, I'll just flag one thing for your audience, and that's that there are these there's another seminar series where they're going to give a version of this talk, which I believe you can just kind of sign up for. There are these so-called masked seminars. This is running out of, I forgot where these run out of. But they're giving this talk next week, and it's called the organization that runs these is called the acronym is MAST. I'm like trying to figure out what the thing is actually called. They are called the Meetings on Aegean Studies, and they're going to give a version of this talk again 1 week from today. So if anybody's interested, they could probably sort of Google that and find a place to sign up.
Okay, and that's online.
Yeah, it should be on Zoom. That's my understanding.
And Davis asked in the chat, did they announce when this is all going to be published?
It's published. It's well, I mean, I think I think there will be some kind of a more full published edition, but you can see it online right now, actually.
Okay.
So hold on, I'll just drop this in the chat because I wrote it to myself as a kind of memo. But if you want to access the text, you can find it here. Just follow these instructions,
Cool.
which I copied out of the Zoom chat this morning. But yeah, it's there on this, at least this preliminary online
Oh,
translation.
you sent
This
it. By the way, set your chat to everyone if you go into the
oh,
dot to
okay.
dots because you sent it host panels. I just copied it for everyone, but just
I don't
by
Jack,
default.
I actually don't see that. I have three options. I have hosts and panelists, Jackson or Luke.
Oh, weird. Okay, well then I'll throw things to everyone if you
Okay.
need to.
Yeah, sorry. But at any rate, that is the yeah, you can read them now. So you can go there and try your own hand at analyzing this text.
Awesome. Oh, I just figured out how to do it. I set it so that you can chat with everyone. Learning Zoom day by day. So that's really cool. And it sounds like kind of a rogue Anatolian language in a way. I mean, like you mentioning there being an I mutation there, some vowel harmony stuff going on. It's pretty cool.
Yeah,
Um,
I'm excited
I
about it.
mean, it's kind of fun to think like just the different ways Anatolian could have kept going. What would a modern Anatolian language look like? Like what kind of zany changes could have happened to it? But it's sort of fun to see that there are zany things happening in the ancient world already.
Yeah. One really cool one is like, that Luwian has this change that it sort of rhoticizes. It takes things that are, well, basically an historical D in intervocalic contexts and makes them into taps, which are then written with rhotic signs, basically. And we don't really have that in the early, like in the cuneiform, in cuneiform Luwian, at least for inherited D, but they seem to have this in Klasmaic, which is like, I don't even really know what to do with that. I mean, maybe it's just a typologically, it's just an independent parallel change, but like, I don't know. Anyway, that's just simply to name one thing. It's kind of incredible how much interesting stuff there is, at least if you're really interested in the nitty-gritty details, within like, I don't know, I didn't count how many lines it is, but it's like, it's less than 20 for sure.
Wow. Well, I mean, we could get that excited about a good 20-line corpus of archaic Latin, right? I mean, like sometimes
It's true. Yeah.
this is the best you can do with some of these really little attested languages.
No, if someone found like I just thinking about like, if someone found like a drinking horn or something, in German, in Germanic land, and it had a
Germanic.
20-line inscription, people would lose their minds. I mean, like,
Oh yeah, sure. I mean, we do find runic inscription. I mean, hey, last year it was announced the oldest known runic inscription, as well as the first one that mentions a Norse god, oldest one that mentions a Norse
but how
god.
long was it? That's what I'm saying. Yeah.
The one that mentions Odin is it's like a sentence. It's like because it says he is Odin's man and it has the guy's name and some other stuff on it. It's not super long.
I mean, that's pretty good, but like this
Yeah.
is like this is pretty substantial.
Oh
I
no,
didn't realize. I genuinely didn't
I'm
know
jealous.
as it was. No, I mean, we should all just be I mean, it's so like crazy. I mean, I don't know. We don't get like new discoveries in this way, and so it's very exciting, even the small ones we get.
100%. And it's kind of cool. It seems like there's a fair amount of this going on. And by the way, speaking of discoveries, speaking of text, speaking of languages unattested about 2,000 years ago, we all read, Luke, you've got the book up in front of you. You want to read the title because it's like 18
Yeah,
words
here we
long.
go. Advances in Proto-Basque reconstruction with evidence for the Proto-Indo-European Euskarian hypothesis by Juliette Blevins.
I would actually like to say that mouthful of a title is almost a good sign. Because I feel like if someone is just a complete crank and trying to persuade you of some ludicrous hypothesis, the title is going to be like linguistic revolution or something. You know what I mean?
Sure.
I'm sort of impressed that she stuck with such a ludicrously long title. So let's talk about what we found in this book, what it purports to do, how we feel about what it did. Anybody want to sum up the problem of Basque to start with here?
This feels like you're leading a graduate seminar, and you're like, all right, one of you do the work for me.
No, we're all doing the work. What do you think?
I'm not trying to do work.
What do you think the problem of Basque is?
Well, okay. I'm just trying not to hog the mic as it were, but for those who aren't aware, so maybe people who watch this now or later aren't, Basque, B-A-S-Q-U-E, is a language spoken in the Pyrenees region of the Iberian Peninsula and southern France. And it is, as far as has been documented thus far, not related to any other language. So it appears to be the only remnant in Europe of a language spoken there before the migration of Indo-European speakers into Europe.
And to be clear, there are other European languages that are not Indo-European, such as Hungarian or Finnish, but they're not remnants of previous groups. They came, well, at least in the case of Hungarians, we know they came later from the East.
Right. But this is remaining from before Indo-European got there. Whereas Hungarian is a later intrusion of Uralic, and then Finnish is probably a roughly contemporary intrusion of Uralic into Scandinavia.
Yeah. And we know of other languages that used to exist, like Etruscan, that at least have not been conclusively linked to Indo-European languages. Let's put it that way. But there's no living descendant of Etruscan.
Sure. And eventually, if I can get Luke and Tony into one room, I would like to put you both on top of a small table with your left arms tied together and knives in your right hands, and get you to discuss the question of whether Etruscan might be an Anatolian language.
I think it's interesting. I have no dog in the fight, as it were. So I'm not gonna do a cage match with Tony, because I'm not interested in arguing for a position. I'm genuinely interested in studying the data.
Yeah.
Oh, sure.
I mean, I don't know very much about it. It doesn't look like an Anatolian language, but the idea that it is a language that came out of Anatolia, the geographic space, I mean, at least it seems like there's I suppose that's kind of like a, that has more plausibility to me, but I'm not
sure. Right. And of course, we don't know for sure that it did, but Herodotus says that they thought they did, which, is the only piece of evidence we really have on that.
I mean, it's just a very, it's all the cute stuff. And I think I've mentioned this before, that Alwyn Kluker has an article or two on this. I mean, it's not his novel idea or anything, just, he's recently looked at it. And
either way, the hypothesis would have to rise or fall in the linguistic data, not some rumor from Herodotus.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I mean, there's also the Aeneid, obviously. They're like, the
whole Aeneid is based on this myth, right?
So. And that's the fun part. Anyway, but no, we'll do that. Maybe we should do that on some other occasion. We have more than enough Basque to talk about, I think, today, right?
Yeah. And by the way, Peter had asked in the chat if there were other non-European languages in Europe except for those three. I'd add Estonian, which is related to Finnish. It's also Finnish, Estonian, Hungarian are in the Uralic language family. But Basque, as far as previously documented, not related to another language. Now, and Sami languages, good catch by Davis. Yeah. Of course, people don't think about that as much because they don't have a flag behind them. So I think actually my biggest caveat about this whole discussion is that I have never studied Basque per se, right? I mean, I've looked under the hood a little bit, especially in reading this book, like kind of getting a sense for what the morphology is like, trying to piece together a couple of readings from a Bible translation that I found. But I'm no expert on Basque in particular.
None of us
are, I believe, unless Tony has some Basque up his sleeve.
No Basque. And this is, I think this is the great challenge of the book. And there's not a lot, this book hasn't gotten a lot of reviews. That's something we'll come back to. It has seen a few, but maybe not as many as I mean, I guess the reason we're talking about today is because at least my impression is it hasn't really gotten as much attention,
and it's
at least among the as it deserves.
It's 6 years old, which I did not realize it was that old.
Actually. I didn't either.
She's been working on this a while, and this idea came on my radar around 2015 when she gave a talk at MIT about a kind of preliminary version of this book, and I heard from multiple people like, oh, there's some people whose opinion I take seriously that this is not a joke. There's some real meat to this. But at any rate, the reason I mentioned the reviews is that there is one review that I found and quite liked, or I liked aspects of it, I should say. And I put it in the link in the chat. And I just think that the guy says, and I think he really nails this, he says that the ideal reviewer for this book must be a super linguist. The number of fully qualified individual reviewers on this book on a planet is probably smaller than 5. You have to have a solid knowledge of Basque and its dialect ramifications, about Aquitanian epigraphy, about early Basque toponymy, a bunch of Basque stuff, and then also about historical phonology and phonological typology. You have to know a lot about Indo-European. Ideally, if you want to evaluate the statistical component of it, you should know stuff about that too. And it's like nobody really controls all of this. And so I don't think we should feel bad about kind of just, knowing a little bit about some of these things and trying to weigh in.
True. So, I mean, we control the Indo-European side of this well enough. And I think, with the caveat that we're sort of trusting her on the Basque evidence, it's more persuasive than not, I think.
Yeah. As I mentioned yesterday when we were talking about this a little bit, I think if this was a court case, it would win a civil trial. It would win the preponderance of evidence standard. Like it convinces me well over 50%. Let's put it that way. But would it win a criminal trial? Beyond a shadow of a doubt, I don't know.
Yeah. That's well said. So, gentlemen, what did you find most persuasive in her arguments? I mean, can you present something that struck you in particular from this book?
Why don't you start, Luke? I have thoughts on this, but I don't.
Okay. Well, as we all know, because we've gone through plenty of formal training in historical linguistics, the correspondence sets are very important, and the place that as you mentioned, Jackson, the cranks will often go wrong is they'll just be like, look, here's a word, and here's a word, and they kind of look like, no, that's not good enough. You have to build these robust correspondence sets, and obviously she knows what she's doing as far as trying to do that, at least. And she makes some pretty good progress, I think. If her reconstruction of very early Basque or Proto-Basque or pre-Proto-Basque or whatever we want to call it is correct, and of course that's an if, but if it's correct, then she's able to link quite a few. I mean, not just one or two, but dozens of Basque words. And Jackson, you mentioned you had read through some of the appendix, which I didn't. I flipped through it a little bit, but I think
I read the whole appendix.
Oh, well, you definitely read more than I did.
So
and that's impressive. That appendix is 200 pages
it's as long as the rest of the book.
Yeah.
I mean, it's almost as long as the rest.
It's impressive. It's an impressive work.
Well, but I was like, look, if I'm going to read this thing, I'm going to read this thing, because I thought where it was really going to be tested was in the appendix. Because I mean, if you wanted to slip something by somebody, you slip it by them in the actually very nicely written prose of the chapters. It's like, but like you don't necessarily expect people to dig into and see if you really mined that data. And she really mined that data. Like, I don't necessarily agree with every single thing that she proposes as a cognate. Some of them are thinner than others.
Sure.
But there is some significant, like, Grimm's law level implications for the relation between a Proto-Yaskarian and a Proto-Indo-European in there.
Right. And just thinking statistically, even if 50% of the connections that she proposes turn out to be wrong, that's still really good. I mean, 50% of a lot is still a lot. So the fact that some of them probably won't, hold up is fine, honestly. If most of them or even many of them do, she wins. I think she proves her point. Go ahead.
Did you write down some of your favorites? I wrote.
Yes.
I would be fun to save to highlight some favorites here, just because. I mean, as you say, there are many, and but I don't know what ones. I'd be curious to know what ones you guys like. I have like a few real faves.
So I've got a list, and I also want to point out as we get into this that she's not afraid to throw away what could look like some really easy wins that she says don't work systematically, and so she doesn't want them, right? Which I think is extremely responsible. So, for example, there's what she says is a false friend based on her analysis of the regular correspondences between Proto-Indo-European and Proto-Basque. There's apparently a Basque word, and I'll spell it in the chat here, Sinar or Sinhar, that means husband. She says this could be an easy false friend for senor, right? But she has she proposes a different origin for it, which I think is really responsible. I thought some of the most interesting ones, there was histar for star, sore for woman, which is really, really interesting because it looks like a very archaic word for woman in Indo-European, soror, sister, and then sor is a suffix. Sta, to be or stand. Those are a few that I wrote down that were particularly
With
interesting.
Stott, kind of makes you wonder who saw that before, because that, you don't have to even know much about Indo-European to be like, wait, Stott, so obviously somebody must have seen that before, but she's really gone through the legwork of trying to build a system.
Well, and I think, I'm not going to try to flip to this in my Kindle right the second, but I think this is one of those words where someone can pretty easily say whatever the modern Basque dialect form is.
Could have been
this is
borrowed
from Spanish.
Romance language. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Tons of them do that for thesis here, but I think the argument here hangs pretty crucially. Yeah, I think that the argument here, and this is one where it's like, oh, it's, our weakness is going to be this evaluating the Basque evidence. But like, if you could really show that there was an initial H here in Basque, that would be really nice, because this lines up very nicely with, sorry, you'll have to forgive the lack of diacritics and stuff, but Hittite has asterts like this, which clearly shows the laryngeal reflex at the beginning. And so like, if that really were there in Basque, then, but as near as I can tell, actually, it's not, yeah, I mean, I looked in the appendix just now and I double checked it, and I don't see any evidence for that initial H. So, so I don't know. I mean, I agree that it's compelling, but it's, yeah, it's also one of these ones where, where she has this, I mean, one of the neat features, I don't want to get too far into this sort of just purely more phonological type stuff, but, she had this, and it's a controversial idea, this idea that there were these initial S consonant clusters at the beginning of words in Basque. And this is one of those ones where I think the outcome here is actually Ishar or something like that. Sorry, my Basque pronunciation is going to be wretched through this, but a thing with a Z, where those Z's are supposed to be the reflexes of consonant. Yeah.
Yeah. Hold on.
And you're right that a lot of her reconstructions depend on that rule you just mentioned, that the orthographic Z has to come from these consonant clusters. And if that turns out not to be true, then a lot of what she's saying falls apart.
Yeah, I'll mention, I read very briefly Balde, or sorry, that's probably a shit pronunciation of his name, but he's a really prominent, like one of the top Basque guys. And this is one that he really takes issue with, and sort of, so if you're looking for a challenge on the Basque internal evidence, that would be the place to see it. Although I don't think he deals with every single example. He just deals with some. But that's really, I mean, that's an important part of this book, is that that's a novel idea, right? The idea that you had initial S consonant clusters at the beginning of words, and it's just one that where you really just kind of have to evaluate on the empirical evidence. If so, it would look a lot more like Indo-European, where we have tons of S initial S consonant clusters at the beginning. So it's sort of a big hinge point for this comparison, I think.
Right, but part of what makes this more persuasive than not, I think, is that it can tell you something about the history of Basque, and it can tell you something about the history of Indo-European, right? Because it sort of solves problems for both. If you can say, well, these S plus consonant clusters that we can reconstruct in Indo-European can solve the origin of these Z's that are distinct from S's in Basque.
Yeah.
But then there's some places in, there were some particular Basque dialects that preserved initial H as a potential continuation of the laryngeal. And there were a couple places, and I have to dig into my notes a little bit, but there
there definitely are. What I was just saying is, I'm not sure there are for this word, because
no, not for this word, right.
I forgot which dialects are the H-y, she spends a lot of time about the aspirating dialects, and I should remember what they are, but I don't remember. That's what she calls them, the dialects that preserve H, that is to say. And I don't think they're even uniform in which environments they necessarily preserve H.
Right. But then, yeah, well, I mean, part of what's so difficult about this is is you have one language or several dialects, but one language that you're trying to figure out a protoform for 2,000 years ago. And so without a comparandum it can be pretty hard to figure out, like, well, what's actually a retention, what's some kind of weirdly conditioned reflex today. There is some Aquitanian, which is apparently an earlier stage of Basque or a very closely related dialect. There's that new thing that was discovered like last year, the hand, that has some very, like, what I think is practically Proto-Basque written on it. And then there's some names that occur in different inscriptions from the Roman period, right? But so of course, anytime that she's got something from the Roman period, that's great. But that's not a whole lot of material. You know, we're in a position sort of like we are with early runes, where there's just a ton of names and not a lot else.
In a few places, though, there are places where that evidence really does seem useful, and it's hard for me to. I don't really know to what extent some of those are sort of her original observations, and to what extent this is more broadly known within Basque. But I mean, some of them seem to confirm important pieces of the Basque reconstruction. Not going to be the most controversial ones, like this thing about the Z. This is really kind of going to rely on external, you know, on how confident you are about the equations to Indo-European.
But speaking of the equations to Indo-European,
yeah.
I thought, well, there's a few conclusions that I think are really interesting. Probably one of the most striking to me is that there's a typological problem with Proto-Indo-European is often reconstructed, that B is very rare. And it just looks like a strange system, the constant system of Proto-Indo-European lacking that B, or having that B being very rare. But she postulates that in many places where Indo-European has a W, which is super abundant in Proto-Indo-European, it's an old B, and that it's cognate with B in Proto-Euskarian. And I found that a really fascinating conclusion that I thought could really illuminate something about the history of Indo-European, much as the SC clusters in Indo-European can illuminate something about the history of Basque. Any remarks on the BW thing?
This is very attractive. I mean, in many ways, this is extremely attractive. Like, right. So I think, as she pointed out nicely, root initial W is basically the most common thing, except for root initial S in Indo-European. It's like way massively overrepresented. And so if you think of the root initial W as having two sources, in contrast to most things which mostly have one source, so it would be both from B and W, then it would help make sense out of that fact. My only sort of caveat, though, is that we do have like the best example of a reconstructible Indo-European B is precisely in word initial position. It's, you know, it's the bell of Latin, you know, of Greek deltion, better, and Latin debilis, lacking strength, and Vedic balam, strength. And so like, it would be nice to have some kind of a story about why that one was a non-undergoer or something.
It was just so strong, Tony. I mean, come on.
It was just too strong. That's right. He was like, oh, yeah. But yeah, I thought that was a very neat phonological. Yeah, I think we should come back to them. But like, the biggest strengths of this hypothesis is its capacity to explain these funny. I mean, so some explanatory power on the Basque side, if you believe in that thing which you're talking about, the S consonants, but on the European side, these weird features of the Indo-European stop system as we reconstruct it are like that. I mean, this should be extremely attractive unless you are, well, you know, unless you have alternative views about the prehistory of the system. But for people,
unless you're a Glottalic fan, perhaps.
Person, I would love to. That's why it makes me extremely sympathetic to this, because I think there's, you know, I've always thought the Glottalic theory is not great, and in recent years I've only seen more reasons to believe that it's not great. I'll say maybe we'll say more about this later, but I would love to stay on word equations. I would love to talk about a couple of my faves, because I want to move on. Yeah. Two that I want to flag as especially cute are these ones. Oh, that's so nice. It actually copies out of my notes. Look at that. Oh, perfect. Yeah, this Proto-Basque root for hargi, which would be the word for light. And this makes looks a whole lot like Hittite harki, which means white. And as you can see here, it sets up an Indo-European. So crucially, the root here ends in a palatovelar. Yeah, and so kind of tying into those distributional asymmetries we're talking about. One of the things that her hypothesis explains is why you have so many velar stops in Indo-European. Like, why do you have a palatal series and a plain series and labial series? And her answer is basically, there used to be segments that came after those. The palatal ones were followed by palatalizers, by the high front vowels, and the labialized ones were followed by oo, by back-rounded vowels. And it's like, this is just like too perfect. It's just like, this is exactly where they should come from. And the reason I particularly, that's a big reason to like her account, but in this particular example, again, it lines really perfectly with the Hittite form. This root, as near as I can tell, is not really attested in any Indo-European languages that are anywhere near Basque land, like the ancestral home of the Basques. It's basically only it's in Indic and Greek and in Hittite, and maybe there's one or two, but in any case, it's not in Celtic, it's not in Italic, it's not in Germanic as near as I can tell. So this makes it, I don't know, all of these features make it look like very attractive.
Oh, I agree. The notion that that this is the source, that Proto-Basque key is cognate with Indo-European palatal K, ka or ko with Indo-European regular K, and then ku with Indo-European qua, very attractive. Yep. And she has several sets all over the appendix with this. I thought that was an extremely attractive idea. I was looking for some of my favorite cognate proposals too. One that I liked was put this in the chat. Beal to turn and Proto-European well to turn for the BW.
Yeah, I agree. That's a nice looking example. The vowel correspondencies are not that one. I mean, they seem to be some generalizations, but I think there's more work to be done to fit together the vowel correspondence as a general thing. But the fact that it does have, even with traces of, things that look kind of similar to Indo-European qualitative ablaut, especially, that are, they don't even really make sense in Basque terms. So like, if you want to accept this equation, it's just say it doesn't help us understand Indo-European ablaut, but the fact that it has similar looking things is kind of funny and interesting.
When she's listing cognates in the appendix, she'll often say the comparison here is being made with Indo-European O grade, with Indo-European full grade, with Indo-European 0 grade, without trying to account for why, which I think that if her account is correct, there's a very interesting further question to be asked about why. What role is the grade performing here, there, wherever, does one of these proto-languages elucidate what's going on with the other? But I think that's beyond the scope of what she was setting up here. There were some interesting questions in the chat that I thought would fit in here. Davis asked, does she say anything about the standard reconstruction of Proto-Basque without an M? Yes. She does mention that.
Yeah.
Her account does have an M, as I recall, doesn't it?
Yeah. That's one of her big, innovations for Basque. And I shouldn't say innovate. It's not a Basque, sorry, not in the linguistic sense. I just mean proposing that the Basque this is one of her major claims that challenges the traditional reconstruction.
And she draws on some internal evidence for that, and I don't have enough command of the Basque material to.
No, it's done. She makes this. The whole first book is the first part of the book is just Basque. So she makes the case on completely Basque internal grounds that it exists, and You could believe it or not. And one should. I actually don't know what the Bascologists make of this. At sort of my superficial understanding, it looked relatively persuasive. Basically, she just says there's some irreducible M, ones that can't be explained in the various ways in which other people normally explain the existence of M in Basque. And yeah, I don't know, they seemed okay to me, but again, I'm not an expert on the data.
Yeah, I didn't see much stick. Again, don't know Basque, but I didn't see anything to criticize in her methods for internal reconstruction. And another question here that I thought is pretty interesting and kind of opens up its own can of worms is Cameron's question. How does she suggest Proto-Euskerian and Proto-European may actually have been related? I wrote down a quote that I thought was interesting. Hold on, where did I put this? Quote, Proto-Basque split from the common ancestor prior to, but close to, the time that common Anatolian did. Close quote. What do you gentlemen think about that?
Close is vague, so that
Yeah.
gives her a lot of wiggle room. And of course, when we're dealing with this kind of time depth, what's the difference between 500 years difference? It's hard to say, right?
My impression is that the split would have to be considerably deeper than that. That's just my intuition. These seem substantially different. I don't know. I mean, it's like I mean, the only thing that is, I don't really even know why she would posit it to be particularly close. I couldn't really understand the argument for
it. Doesn't need it to be.
Yeah, it doesn't really have to be. And indeed, I mean, under any reconstruction, under any reconstruction that gets Basque back to Proto-European time depths, Basque has to be ludicrously conservative with its well, basically with its fricatives, especially its intervocalic fricatives. And I mean, sort of defying, I mean, this is a point that other reviewers have make and such. It's like, it just, if you guys know the history of other old Indo-European languages, you'll know that, once you get from S to H or something like this, H tends to go. Indo-European does not like its intervocalic fricatives, and they're super unstable. But on just to get to Proto-Basque of a time depth of Proto-European, Basque would have to be very, very conservative with these. It would really have to retain these a super long time. So once you've already decided it's going to retain these things super conservatively for thousands of years, what's another couple of thousand of years? It just has to be something. You'd have to say it's something particular about the structure of Basque or something that is making it exceptional. And if it's exceptional, then for 4,000 years before we can observe it, why not have it be for 6,000 or 8,000 years before we can observe it?
Yeah, I mean, when we think about the kinds of languages, and I don't mean typologically kinds of languages that are more conservative, they are usually the ones that are cut off from a lot of outside influences that come in and change them. I mean, even just in the past 1,500 to 2,000 years, when we hit play on the Romance languages of Iberia and see which ones changed faster, it's all the ones on the coast. And then you get Castilian in the interior of Iberia that changed less than anything on the coast, pretty much, because it was cut off from that influence. You get Icelandic, of course, which Jackson knows well, which, of course, is on the coast, but it's so cut off from everything else. So maybe an argument could be made here that it was super conservative if so, because it was way up in the mountains and nobody ever talked to them. Yeah. Now, it's still very conservative even for that, but nonetheless, it might be geographically, sociolinguistically speaking, the kind of language we would be looking for if we were going to try to find one that was unusually conservative.
I completely agree. Those are all good points, and I did think of those. Although there's just maybe a caveat though in that respect is it would have to be pretty innovative in its grammatical, in its phonology, it would have to be, but in its grammar, it would be really super, really radically innovative, right? I mean, there's a very nice summary of all of the rare properties of that same Baca review has just this great summary of things that are basically unique to Basque within Europe. And it's like, okay, it's like it has ergative alignment, it does agreement, this extremely rich verbal morphology where things agree with the subject and the object, and it basically agrees with everything and marks all its arguments on the verb. And it has this one thing people love to talk about is this, this partial distinction between like male and female gender. What do they call these? Genderlects or something? I forgot what the technical name of these things are. Anyway, all I'm saying is that there's a bunch of things that are no gender, no grammatical gender, of course. Anyway, so it has to change pretty significantly its grammar, but yeah, I've been super conservative with especially its phonology, and I that can be, maybe that's a thing. One thing that occurred to me, and I don't really know the answer to, is we do have modern Indo-European languages that have ergative alignment, but my understanding is that they are basically in places where contact with adjacent languages gets invoked in this. So like you have modern Indian, modern Indic languages that have ergative alignment. But my understanding is usually that this is attributed to their, to surrounding languages in India, and you can't do that for Basque, right? It's surrounded by modern Indo-European language. You could maybe say something about like an ancient substrate that was lost, but like now we're not doing science anymore. We're doing,
Tony, what's the current state of the question? And I asked this because my information is like 15 years old. What's the current state of the question on the thinking that pre-Proto-Indo-European may have been ergative?
So that's the
based on the S marking, the masculine agent, or which would have just been animate agent probably originally, and then M in the neuter. What's the current state of that question?
No, I'm glad you said it, because it means that I'm not just rambling. No, that's exactly would be the alternative solution to this. And it's not when she talks, I think, at all. I don't think she even mentions in the book, but like the two big reconstructions of, the two folks working on the Indo-European perspective and looking back into infinity, Jay Jasanoff and Andreas Fili. Andreas Fili's book on all this, he wrote a big book on the history of the Greek verbal system, but tracing it back all the way back to like pre-Proto-Indo-European. I think he puts a big picture of the galaxy on the front of it, and that kind of captures this.
Those books.
Yeah, and at any rate, both of them, a point where they actually both agree is that, yeah, they would like to reconstruct some kind of ergative or split ergative system for Proto-Indo-European, or I should say pre-Proto-European or pre-Proto-Indo-European, or whatever stage of this is. So yeah, that would be another alternative to saying that Basque is so grammatically innovative. It's like,
maybe it's conservative.
Maybe it's conservative.
Yeah, maybe it's actually conservative. Same with the genders.
Yeah, that would be a genuinely interesting thing to. I mean, it would be no one has ever tried this, and I think it would be extremely hard. But like, you could make some inferences about what pre-Proto-Indo-European. I mean, it would basically be doing. Yeah, I mean, you'd have to do something like you'd have to do the level of guessing that she's doing, the level of internal reconstruction she's doing for Basque, again, to get to internally reconstruct that, and then you'd have to do this in Indo-European too, and then you'd be comparing them. So it's like, it's not, not so much we're comparing comparatively reconstructed Indo-European and internally reconstructed Basque, which is what this book is about, but it would be comparing internally reconstructed stages of both. And I don't know, maybe there's something there, but like it would be, I don't think anyone has really pursued this.
No, and it's kind of early to pursue it from the perspective of this book. So you just addressed something that I was going to ask myself, is when you said, well, it's got to be very phonologically conservative, but very morphologically innovative. And I thought, well, what if Indo-European then is what's being morphologically innovative? It's possible. Could you, somebody want to explain what ergative means for those who might be unfamiliar? Do you have a quick hit answer?
Sure. Yeah. So if you are familiar with Indo-European languages, you have like nominative and accusative case, and the nominative will mark the subject of a transitive verb or the subject of an intransitive verb, and the accusative will be used for the objects of transitive verbs. In an ergative system, so basically in that system, subjects of transitive verbs and subjects of intransitive, they go together. They get one marking, nominative, and the direct objects of transitive verbs gets another marking called accusative. In an ergative system, it's the subjects of intransitive verbs, and this is simplifying just a little bit, but subjects of intransitive verbs and direct objects get the same marking. That is called absolutive case, and subjects of transitive verbs, so agents, get a different case, and that's called ergative. That's
what one way to think about this in English is, and we obviously don't have the system, but if I say the car ran, you can put other stuff. The car ran well, the car ran, whatever. The car ran. Okay, the car is a subject. It would, if we had a case system in English, we put it in the nominative. Okay. But then if you flip it, you can have a sentence, I ran the car, or I turned the car on, or whatever. In which case the car would be accusative because it's the object, and now I'm the subject because I'm doing it. But if you really think about this, the car isn't doing anything different in those two sentences. It's running. The only difference is in the second sentence, you add the agent of who's making it run, which in this case is me. And so in ergative system is kind of elegant in this sense, because if you don't have the agent, it doesn't matter if the car is running or somebody's running the car, it's doing the same thing, so it gets the same marking. Whereas then if you specify who the agent is, then you need a special marking for that person.
Mm-hmm.
That's how the system works, basically.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so just the fact this is so conceptually different from an Indo-European nominative accusative system. Obviously, you have to account, if you're going to make a complete account of, Proto-Indo-Euro-Euskarian, you've got to come up with whether it's nominative, accusative, or ergative. Right. I mean, you have to account for the fact those are so completely different. Or for some third system that gets right.
There is this, these vestigial pieces of Indo-European that at least can be used to suggest that an earlier stage of Indo-European was ergative.
Sure.
Yeah.
Even though later dialects were not.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. The big piece that everyone, as a lot of people who are reconstructing ergative are seizing on is the fact that the endings of the middle in Indo-European, they look, once you reconstruct these things all the way back, they basically look like the endings that are associated with at least a particular set of non-middle verbs. Basically, so famously within the languages that people here probably know better, these are like the perfects of perfect active and middle look extremely similar within. It's you can't see this so directly in Greek or something because some things have changed, but once you kind of do comparative reconstruction over these, they just look they look a lot alike. Yeah,
and the perfect itself seems to go back to a stative, at least in Greek, Indo-Iranian, which would not be active, right? In an ergative system, a stative would just be like, I'm in a state. I'm not an agent doing something. So in an ergative system, it wouldn't get that special marking for me running the car, for instance. Yeah. So it makes sense that it would be the same endings as the middle, which is not an agent, at least in the same way.
Yeah, I don't want to get too in the weeds, but the other problem here is obviously this is it looks like these he conjugation verbs in Hittite, where
that too.
Plenty, right? But like the problem with those, of course, is famously they're not actually stative. Some.
Right. That's why I left Anatolian out when I said
yeah. So this is the Anatolian complicates it. But yes, I agree with you. That is so. Anyway, this is what people are seizing on who are doing internal reconstruction of Indo-European, but it really has not. I mean, Andreas Vili's book is a more serious attempt to do this than any one that has been put forward in a while. The book is extremely long and does spend a pretty good amount of time dwelling on this, but let's just say it has not been even. In the same way that I don't think anybody has tried this for Proto-Basque in a serious way, I don't think anybody has tried this for Indo-European in a truly kind of rigorous way.
Which is funny because like when me and Jackson were in grad school, with Klein, this was something I was really interested in. I was like, man, this is so fascinating. Like, what if pre-Proto-Indo-European was ergative? And I read everything I could get my hands on, but again, it's been 15 years. So I'm sorry to hear it hasn't been pushed forward in a really systematic way.
This Vili book is worth, I mean, if people are interested,
although that sounds like a good book to check out.
They should check that out because it's like it is a big it's a big book. It's a big book
Right. Yeah.
written by an important scholar, and he spent a lot of time thinking about it. And
Yeah.
I don't know. It's
I will.
yeah.
What's the title?
The origin of the Greek verbal system, or the prehistory of the Greek verbal system. Yeah, it's called. Huh. If I could type, then I could probably pull it up. But yeah, origins of the Greek verb. Yeah.
Okay.
It's a Cambridge title. Yeah, it's you know, it's big. It's a big book.
Stella's got the link in the chat there.
Oh, okay, all
Yep,
right.
there's the galaxy. I found it.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah. Anyway, yeah, that I don't want to spend too long on that. Yeah.
So one more feature that comes up quite a bit. I want to read another quote from this book. Quote, these conservative features are shared by Proto-Basque and Common Anatolian and include the regular continuation of pre-PIE laryngals as laryngals, distinct monosegmental or bisegmental strings corresponding to the three PIE velar categories of plain, palatalized, and labialized, and the absence of root initial R. What did you think of the of that last bit?
Those are all true facts. I don't know. I'm not sure how. I mean, I'm not sure how significant. I mean, okay. I mean, the preservation of some Proto-European lineals, that's an archaism. That's obviously an old-looking thing within Anatolian. So famous conservative feature of it. For 3, the absence of root initial R. My understanding is that this is not all that uncommon. So it's not like a unique feature of Basque and Indo-European. This is just there are other languages that have that. I can't recall what they are off the hand, but so it's it's meaningful. I mean, when it's one of the it's another thing you add to the mix, but I don't think it's crucial in itself. And then obviously the continuation of the three-way velar. I mean, the three-way velar contrast is that's something that her hypothesis is really getting at, and that's cool. But yeah, this is just another conservative feature of Anatolian. We would still reconstruct that contrast even if we didn't have the Anatolian evidence. So so anyway, this is just places in which Anatolian looks weird and old. And I don't know. I guess if you take the view that if you start off with this unitary macro superfamily that includes Indo-European and Basque, and Basque is say the first to depart, and Anatolian is the next, like that would be the natural hypothesis. And yeah, and under that view, it's just these are two conservative ones. So this works. It fits with her proposal. But it's not like a devastating argument all on it, just on its own.
Sure. But that leads me to something that you and I talked about briefly in a text exchange, which was if we look at a late Anatolian language, Lycian, say, it's not super obvious right away, like, oh wow, this is Indo-European. Something like that would be roughly contemporary with what she reconstructs as Proto-Basque.
Yeah, like the shallow, right, before you start doing internal reconstruction, like the comparison between this and Aquitanian, I mean, it doesn't get you maybe quite as deep as Lycian, but we're in the ballpark.
Yeah. But morphologically, the morphology of something like Lycian looks more Indo-European. The categories are more Indo-European than what you're going to be able to reconstruct for Proto-Basque there. That was the main thing that led me to think, or my other analogy was Gothic. Gothic would be roughly contemporary, maybe a little bit later than this Proto-Basque.
Yeah, Gothic
but it's obviously in
right zone. Yeah.
Yeah, but it's obviously Indo-European, right? I mean, you've got Indo-European ablaut, you've got tons of cognates, you got Grimm's Law to explain some unobvious cognates. It just seems to me from that impressionistically, kind of getting back to the question that started us on this, the split has to be a good bit older than the split of Anatolian. But as you said, like as you
unless
and
it's more conservative, just because it's been cut off, right? Like
Yeah.
Gothic and Armenian, classical Armenian, pretty coterminous, but classical Armenian, it took them decades to figure out, a century to figure out that was an Indo-European language, right?
That's true. That's true. Yeah. No,
So it
that's
just depends
well
on how
observed.
open to influence the particular language is, which is why some of the glotto-chronological stuff, like there is no normal clock for
Losing
Right,
like
change.
right.
losing like 70% of your native lexicon does make it harder to figure out what
Right.
language what sort of language affiliation you have. That's a tough one. Yeah.
I often wonder what linguists would do with, modern English if all this stuff had been invented in China and the Chinese colonized the globe and then it stumbled upon English. What would those linguists have thought if there had not been a system of writing that showed exactly what happened for the past 1,000, 2,000 years?
Mhm.
For
Yeah,
that matter, what would they think of Parisian French?
sure, sure.
Would they
And
even
that,
be what would they make the connection to Latin originally if they just had the phonetics, not the writing system, just the phonetics?
right, right. I think this actually connects to something that, if I understand the question right, that Payson was asking in the comments about how, of course, we're subject to the whims of when a particular language is written down, and we do not have particularly old continuous texts in Basque. Uh, so that is a problem. We're looking at a language that's uh, pretty recently written down, trying to reconstruct what it looks like maybe 2,000 years ago, and then with Proto-Indo-European, we're talking about something maybe 6,000 years ago.
Yeah, I suppose the branch that is like, for the majority, right, once you get past these kind of relatively small inscriptional forms, it's like Albanian or something, the
Yeah,
most of it come down, it doesn't show up until like the past the 16th century or something. It's maybe there's a little bit of material older than that. I did look at this, I just but I couldn't find like a totally concise description of what we have of the early stages.
yeah. Thomas asked, was your comment on archaeological or genetic evidence? I remember there being some discussion about some new farming group that had moved into Spain in the late
Right at
Stone
the
Age.
end,
Was that
like
right?
the very last page.
Yeah, I wrote down this stuff. It's like pages, like it's like within the last 5 pages of the book. Like I have it noted on like page 207 or something, or around there. And the content of the book, the non-appendices of the book, end I think on page 212 or something. So it really is kind of tucked in there at the tail end. This is one where it's kind of interesting. Like I wonder what will happen in the coming years. Like can I mean paleogenetics is like, this is like the cutting edge and things are changing at an extremely rapid pace. I'm like, I wonder if that can like get at this question, or if maybe it's just the fact that the Basques are so kind of like embedded in Europe, and also we would be looking for the Indo-European signature in Basque people
We
who are like already would have it because they're living in Europe. I don't know. Like
yeah
I mean, maybe there's a nuanced way to get at this. I'm again not I think you
we
talked to Art, and
yeah we talked to a
yeah,
paleogeneticist, and his evidence actually showed the Basque basically look like Spaniards.
yeah.
So there's not really any genetic difference that's traceable that they can find. That was my understanding. Wasn't that yours? Because I think actually Basques, Spaniards, like people in Tuscany, they all looked kind of similar.
Yeah, she doesn't. This is not her strength, which is fine. She's just citing a few scholars in a page or two, and I'm not sure she's even consistent in that short section because she seems to say in the first paragraph, at the top of page 210, that Basques are they don't show as much genetic affinity to modern day Sardinians, and the reason that would be important and interesting is the Sardinians, as we talked about, when we were talking with the paleogeneticist, the Sardinians are the least admixed with Indo-Europeans, incoming Indo-European invaders from a few thousand years ago, which makes sense because they're an island and they're not an island a lot of people go to, like Sicily, for instance. So it kind of makes sense that the Sardinians would be a refuge of older genetics if there's going to be one at all. And so we would presume that the Sardinians, which isn't to say there's no Indo-European DNA on Sardinia, that would be crazy. But if we're looking for what the genetics of the pre-Indo-European population would look like, the Sardinians might be our best bet to figure that out. the question is, would we expect the Basque to be related to the Sardinians under her hypothesis? And I suggest actually not.
Right. So
I
you're
suggest
like,
not.
you're kind of like, there's these ways, I mean, right. If you view them as part of the same immigration group, I mean, that you had this initial, I mean, maybe they're, I don't know. There were like the ideas that, there would be some initial migration of like, under this, okay, these two language families go together, like the Basques and whoever else is part of that group kind of went off first and ended up where they were. And then so they should share some common stuff. Then there should be some like, they presumably would mix with whoever that we don't know who was there at that time, but they would mix with them. And so maybe there'd be some detectable signature. I don't know. Again, it's like, it just seems extremely nuanced because you're having to ask, like you're looking for you want the Indo-European signature, but it's going to be there already in the ambient environment. Right. So like
it's about percentages of DNA.
Yeah. It seems extremely difficult, but
right. Now, the current thesis is that the Anatolian farmer DNA from 8,500 years ago spread across southern Europe and the Mediterranean, from east to west, from Anatolia over to what's now Spain and Portugal, and brought a wave of DNA with them, obviously, and brought farming. Right. The reason these people hypothetically spread was they were bringing these new techniques of farming. They displaced the old hunter-gatherers and spread their DNA across most of Southern Europe. And the current belief is that these were not Indo-European speakers. Most people seem to think they could have been Semitic, maybe, although I don't know of any evidence for that. It seems to just be something you read.
I mean, yeah,
it's a good guess. It's a good guess.
The majority of Indo-Europeans believe, but of course, I think Jackson and I were on here talking about the the most recent big splashy Hegarty et al. Publication where they precisely would like to revive the Indo-European spreads with
right. The old Renfrew hypothesis, right?
Yeah.
Which seems to be on the out and out in general.
Well, until this big publication, so they kind of rekindled the So they have flashy new sort of language model and maybe some genetic evidence and so on.
So what if this hypothetical Basque connection with Indo-European could actually tell us that maybe that original wave of farmers, if there's a connection, and she cites two things that seem to be at odds here in the last page, and I'm not sure if she realizes that they're at odds because she doesn't really discuss it. One thing seems to say Basque and Sardinians are not related genetically more than anyone else. And another says, oh, there are definitely links between Basque and Sardinian DNA that are, above the statistical noise, as it were. If the latter, and if she's right that the Basque are related to an earlier stage of Indo-European, theoretically, maybe that early wave of farmers weren't speaking Semitic or another language from the ancient Near East, Afro-Asiatic, whatever. Obviously, Semitic is an Afro-Asiatic language, but some other Afro-Asiatic language. Maybe they were actually speaking something related to Indo-European, not Indo-European itself, but something related to Indo-European, which goes back to the Renfrew hypothesis. But it doesn't disprove the steppe hypothesis at all, right? Like, I think that's pretty firm now, from what I understand, at least that there was an expansion from the steppes.
There's definitely an expansion of farming, right? It's unclear whether.
So what if the farming expansion in the 7th millennium BC, and then the later steppe. And then the later steppe expansion in the 4th to 3rd millennium BC. What if they were both Indo-European in some way, except the steppe expansion was actually Proto-Indo-European? Farming expansion was Proto-Indo-European or whatever.
That's an interesting way to kind of tie these together. Yeah, her treatment of this was so. I mean, I don't blame her. I would not want to wander out of the area in which I feel the most comfortable and kind of go down these roads. And indeed, even in the last pages, I mean, I think there were a few little kind of weird missteps. Like, I was glad she did this thing about mythology, but like, Greek Pegasus, like this isn't gonna work. Like, basically, everyone agrees that this is a borrowing from Anatolian. Luvian has a word that looks basically fits this perfectly. It has It has yeah, Picasa, which means something like which means lightning, and basically this is the and it once you sort of take it in the context of the myth, these pieces come together extremely neatly, and they're just sitting there red in grease, and it's like
That's
so
an Occam's razor. Yeah.
yeah, it's so but I mean, but again, it's like yeah, someone who is more invested in that aspect of the question, I think would, I mean, this is kind of with my take on all of this. Like people should be encouraged. I mean, I find the results of this like broadly encouraging and make me think that people should be looking at all of this harder.
Yeah. And, I think that the kind of speculation about what archaeological cultures, for example, might go together with, some, what are we going to call it? Proto-Indo-Euro-Euskarian. It's outside the scope of this book. And it's just tough to nail down the chronology on that. I wonder if you're getting back into if you're getting back to 8,000 years ago or something. I mean,
it would have to be at least, I think, yeah, at least 8. I mean,
like that almost seems too far for these parallels. You know what I mean? Like that, it's, if she's right about the correspondence that she's got, like with the Wheeler series, for example, I feel like all that data would be lost if you're doubling the time. Like I almost wonder if what you're looking at is like a group that splits off for whatever reason, a la the Tocharians, and just happens to wander real far from the people speaking cousin languages to them. But I don't know. Obviously that this is the sort of thing that linguistics on its own can't answer. I also wonder if you're talking about 8,000 years ago, that might be far enough back that it'd be profitable to take that, whatever you can make, if you can set up paradigms and Swadesh lists or whatever for Proto-Indo-Euro-Euskarian. What does that look like next to Proto-Afroasiatic? What does that look like next to Proto-Uralic? I mean, eventually, I suspect, for the record, this could be misinterpreted easily. So I just want to say I don't believe in the specifics of the Nostratic hypothesis, but I suspect that a lot of old world languages are ultimately related. We just haven't been able to document.
There were only so many places that people could live during the Ice Age.
Yeah, but we haven't documented how. I think this is a really important, interesting step toward documenting how in a small corner. But I suspect that there are further connections that could be made, or maybe not. Maybe so much change has happened that it's impossible to establish what those links are. But I find it encouraging toward the larger macro family comparison idea. Again, this is better done than something like Nostratic. This is even better done than some of the Proto-Indo-Uralic ideas that I've seen put forward.
Yeah, she's a really good linguist. I mean, you, as a phonologist, we sort of just reading through her stuff, reading through her arguments about Basque and just go, again, all I can do is go on the basis data she presents. Again, there's other, I'm not, and without worrying even too much about the meanings of the things that she's using, because, and I've seen that that's one of the criticisms is like, oh, are we, to get these equations lined up, you have to be, let's say, free with the semantics. But again, just as reading it as a historical phonologist and like looking at the stepwise things that she does in applying comparative reconstruction on Basque is very impressive. Like she's very diligent, very good. Like you're like, oh, that is a really nice observation. These data all do seem to fit together in exactly the way that you say that they do. And it's, I don't know. I mean, you would, even if you, again, maybe simplifying the data, you could easily present these things to undergrads as like the sort of toy problems as you're teaching them how to do historical phonology. I mean, they're sort of beautiful in this way.
Well, and I don't think she tries to just cram really different semantics into one root. I mean, she's pretty disciplined about it. By the way, another correspondence we didn't mention that I think is worth noting, just reviewing my notes here, the Proto-European dental stop inventory, that she is pretty typologically rare, but she's explaining those duhs as coming from D vowel H.
Yeah.
Which is pretty interesting, and she's got some good Basque correspondences there.
Yeah, again, that's another one of the controversial parts of her Basque reconstruction, whether you should set up all of these H's that she sets up. I don't know, the evidence she presents looks pretty compelling to me, but it's, it's very hard to evaluate. If you believe those, I mean, this is the single most beautiful book part of the, this would be the neatest feature of Basque. For those of us who don't believe in these glottalic models of Proto-European, which are literally just about solving this typological problem, the one you just flagged about, you said that it's a dental series, but just remember it runs through all of them, right? So that you have this is you have the coronals, t, d, d, and also the velars, k, g, g, and the labials as well. So
the voiced aspirates,
right? Yeah. It's really the voiceless, voiced, and breathy voiced contrast is basically absent in the world's languages. And I mean, the glottalic model it's recommended by almost no evidence. It's basically just fixing the typological problem. And people have scrambled to find other bits of evidence in the daughter languages for it. And as near as, I mean, to my mind, not a single one of them has been at all successful. Maybe the closest thing is Vinter's Law in Slavic, and sorry, in Balto-Slavic, and even that looks like, I don't know, this could just be a length contrast that got phonologized between difference between voiced and anyway. This is neither here nor there. The point is, none of the evidence really looks good. The question is, should we try to fix the thing? And this would be such an easy solution to fix the thing. We have a completely typologically trivial source of breathy voicedness, which would just be these H segments that underwent the vowel, voice stop, vowel, H, and you syncope the vowel, and now you've got these things together, and they get reanalyzed. But it's like, this would be fantastic. I mean, it's as good of a fix as I've ever seen. So again, there's a huge amount of
and she doesn't dwell on it. I mean,
it's really, this would be really beautiful. And yeah, I don't know. I've had this on my mind for some time. I was just at this conference in December where someone presented, Shalice Easterday from Hawaii presented this fantastic talk on the phonological typology, diachronic and synchronic of adjectives, which is what the traditional voice series becomes on the glottalic reconstruction. And basically the conclusion is if you are a language that has these in your proto-language, almost all the languages will have them across the board. Like Indo-European, setting these up for Indo-European, I mean, she doesn't dwell on this point, but basically setting these up for Proto-Indo-European and having them lost everywhere would be completely unprecedented in any language of the world. It's basically impossible. These adjectives are just extremely stable because they're super salient, like when you hear them. And so this as an alternative fix for our wacky Proto-Indo-European system that the data really demands we reconstruct, this is, I mean, this is what makes me want to be a believer and makes me think I need to go learn Basque linguistics so I can really evaluate some of the claims on that side. But man, it is.
Let me put an example in the chat so that we can show people who are perhaps not following this orally what we're talking about. So on the left here is going to be her Proto-Basque reconstruction versus Proto-Indo-European. Oh, excuse me, the Proto-Basque should be Baha. I sort of automatically made that. Yeah, should look like this.
Yeah.
Which, by the way, is more or less laryngeal coloring in the Proto-Basque there. But so Indo-European is postulated to have these voiced aspirate consonants, ba, da, ga. And she's explaining that as being in the ancestor of Basque and Proto-Indo-European, consonant, vowel, then H, where Basque actually preserves the vowel between the consonant and the H.
That's right.
Like she cites modern Basque, and of course, probably none of us knows how to say this exactly, but Bahaskatu, something like that, which means the chat. So showing that space between the B and the H.
Yeah, and that's one of the really nice examples where the semantics seem so easy. Like they're just super, super, super nice match. Yeah. Another one that I like this one too, just because it shows kind of both features simultaneously. So get the palatalization to get you the Indo-European palatovelar G that you need to account for all of the Indo-European outcomes here. And this is the word for goose, and it means animal fat, or at least that's how she reconstructs the Proto-Basque root. So the idea is you'd get the I would get lost and it would palatalize the preceding thing. Then the H would get lost and it would aspirate or make it breathy voiced, the initial stop. And that's just, I don't know, it's very cute. And of course, the semantics are kind of neat, right? So you're like, oh, animal fat. But like, it's like, this is like foie gras. That's what it is.
And a comparison she didn't note and may not have known about is English Greece. Old Norse Gris means piglet. So this sort of semantic drift is entirely, attested. That's easy. Animal product to or from animal that it's made from. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. There's a number of these that I don't know. I just there's just a number of examples. The other one. Yeah, I marked down the one you did too, Jackson. It's just they're very neat. They look compelling. You're kind of like, what do you make of this? And I don't know. To me, the fact that it really it makes me want to believe this. It really does.
Yeah. I find it. I mean, like I don't know that we could do the podcast kind of game of like, well, on a scale of 1 to 10, how do you rate this? But I would say I'm more persuaded than not. I think this shows that there's probably a deep connection between Basque and Proto-Indo-European. What the exact chronology of that is, I'm at sea about. I don't know. I think it's more distant than she says, but I think it's there. On balance from reading this, I would be happy to hear and entertain counter proposals from people who do know the Basque evidence well. But as the one review you cited said, there's probably 5 people who can command all the evidence here. So.
I don't even think there's 5. I don't think there's anyone here who can. I mean, right? It should be written really by a team. That's actually what the guy says, and it's right. There's just no way to.
Sure.
It would have to be, meet me or whatever, or any of us sitting down with a Basque specialist who really knows this stuff, and maybe even getting some other specialists involved in the mix, which I think is a shame because I mean, like I said, this hasn't really got much attention from anybody. I mean, it hasn't gotten scholarly attention. I mean, obviously,
but it deserves a serious read. I mean, it's a serious book. She is not making nutty claims. She's trying to set up a systematic relationship between these languages, and I think she's largely successful. I'm surprised because when I started this book, I thought, for the record, I'd be interested to hear what y'all think too. I thought, no way is this going to persuade me, right? It's like, how many macro families have I seen set up? And also, I'll admit, because I always read introductions, acknowledgments, and dedications. I'm just one of those guys. And I remember reading the introduction, which got a little tiresome, but she said something about how like, and thanking somebody, she said, thank you for teaching me that like scientific revolutions are never accepted at first. And I'm like, oh my God, if you're calling this a revolution, like I already, it just made me think, but it's the only time she really uses that language. She's otherwise modest about it. So I think so I'm going to forgive her for that, but it did not help me be prepared to like this book.
Yeah. Actually, yeah, go ahead. Sorry, Luke.
She's playing a little reverse psychology with you. Like she's trying to get your bar set low at the beginning, and then she's like, actually, look. And you're like, I'm impressed because my bar was set low by the introduction.
Yeah.
Maybe.
She really doesn't take the cheap, as you mentioned earlier in the thing, she doesn't take the cheap ones, and including ones where you go missteps. Like, basically on her analysis, Basque shows a phenomenon much like Grossman's law, and she is both knowledgeable enough to know that this is a thing that a number of languages do, basically, sort of laryngeal features, not letting them co-occur in certain contexts, and so you get assimilation. I think she knows enough to know that most Indo-Europeanists, or she actually definitely knows enough to know that most Indo-Europeanists, or all sensible Indo-Europeanists know that this is a post-Proto-Indo-European phenomenon on Indo-European internal grounds, and so that these are really just typological parallels more than anything else.
And
but
she's disciplined in pointing that out.
Yeah. So I wonder. I saw that, and she was like, "It's like grass ones." I was like, "Oh God, she's not gonna." No.
Yeah.
Perfect. Like just sensibly gets rid of that stuff.
Yeah, she kind of couches it, as I recall, in a discussion of there being sort of similar drift, right? Which is like, well, okay. I mean, like you can set up drift ideas about lots of different languages, but
yeah, I don't think she needed that chapter. Interesting, but it doesn't prove.
It was almost worth pointing out, just in case somebody were to go through her glossary in the appendix and start pointing out those parallels, to say, no, actually, that's something you should refrain from. It's almost a chapter written for people who get too enthusiastic about your idea, maybe. Tony, you just put a something in the
I
chat.
just didn't leave it that dry. That's another one of the nice ones I thought. The root for dark is so this seems to, so you have this Basque, I guess, negu, that I did look at the Basque evidence for it. Mostly it seems to refer to words that mean like winter, or times that are cold, but maybe that's okay. If that's okay on the Basque side, this comparison is another nice one, just because this is the root that shows up in the night word and all over Indo-European, but basically that's the kind of the only place it shows up. It only shows up before suffixes, with like suffix with a T or a T, or sometimes a T2, or things like, Vedic Oktu. At any rate, this is another one where it's like, it's really hard to say that this could be borrowing. Like it just really, like they would never have gotten any evidence for g. You only get qua, really. The devoiced version of this all over the rest of the Indo-European languages. So yeah, I don't know. This is it's just another neat one. It's, we've got a labiovelar. Here we go. That's where it's from. It's from a G plus a U. I don't know. This was another attractive example to me, and it's nothing we haven't already said. It's just another nice one, I think.
No, I like it a lot. Again, she's able to solve problems in both languages. So she also does this with the bear word. Yes. So let me see if I can find this in here. I wrote down a quote. Quote, despite the apparent morphological complexity of PIE, let me write this in the chat for people. This bear, and the number of Indo-European languages that do not show regular reflexes of the final T or palatal K, the Proto-Indo-European form remains unanalyzable. Compare this with Proto-Basque Ars, where there is morphological transparency. So she's also solving a problem of morphological of transparency, making this into, I think she makes it a compound, because har was the bear root in Basque, and then there was something else that she was pending to that. Let me see if I can find it.
I don't think she has any answer for what the heck got tacked onto this in Indo-European terms.
Okay, if she didn't,
really,
then
I mean, it's not really her problem exactly, but it
well,
is.
heck, I mean,
what is that thing? I don't know. She's right. It looks unanalyzable because like there doesn't look like a suffix there. I don't.
Is it some weird worn down form of the dechem, the earth word or something?
Yeah, I don't know. I'm trying to think if you could do it that way. I don't think so, because those are both voiced, and so you should have had you should have had different outcomes in like Greek or something. You should have gotten like, it shouldn't be Greek arctos, it should be like arg. It would have come out like thon or something.
Something would have happened.
Arctos.
Yeah, well, but she's considering tough problems like this and trying to answer difficult questions in Indo-European.
Guys, on the last page, she said that Basque has a dragon slaying myth. We should read it. I wonder what it looks like. I thought, I mean, it's lots of cultures have dragon slaying myths, but I'm just saying.
Yeah, but it's like, put that in the appendix. Like, I don't know where to find this. You know?
Yeah, I bet I was thinking maybe a bit of Googling could turn this up, but you know, we've got our three-headed dragons around Indo-European, as she mentioned. There's, you know, there's more than one, so who knows? You know, again, it's probably a typological universal, but like, yeah, Kathy. But yeah, it would be cool to, I don't know, it just might be fun to see what the Basques thought was interesting about the dragon slaying myth.
Yeah. Well, and then neither one of you said you knew. Yeah, Kathy's right. She says heron suga. The dragon-like creature is heron suga, giant serpent, sometimes described with 7 heads.
The first element, according to Blevins, is the word for 3. And that's but then she doesn't have any more than that. Isn't it? If you really wanted to go deep speculation, one would try to connect this the last ge there somehow to the serpent where she doesn't.
Oh man, maybe.
Blevins doesn't
Yeah,
say,
fire serpent.
You could go down this road. It would be kind of
yeah, fire serpent.
Yeah, exactly.
Holy crap. Yeah. Well, but as attractive as that is, I can't sit down here and work out this language algebra problem, but interesting.
Mm-hmm.
You both said that you don't know anyone who has worked on Basque.
I tried to dig up some, I mean, you know, among acquaintances, and I was totally unsuccessful. Yeah. I once met a student of Walde, but I don't know. We fell out of touch.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know anybody.
Like if there are going to be substantive critiques of this, and I don't mean critiques in the sense of like what we're doing, but actually like disagreements, they're more likely to come from that side. Sure. I'd be interesting to hear an Indo-Europeanist who is skeptical of this, but it seems like all three of us are more positive.
Yeah. And again, I didn't go in thinking I would be positive, so this isn't confirmation bias. If anything, it's like.
No, I mean, the critique in the Walde article I was mentioning, I mean, he basically says, like, consciously or unconsciously, like, she's trying to reconstruct Proto-Basque to look more like, you know, at least, you know, I mean, yeah. So, I mean, it's very consciously or unconsciously, you know, an idea in mind of what the reconstruction should end up looking like, and it would be guided by Indo-European. Now, yeah, I don't control it, and I don't know if there's any real truth to that, but it is something that's worth registering, I suppose, in the interest of, you know, so I don't just sound like an unbelievable shill for this book, just because they fit with my sort of existing worldviews about the Indo-European system. Look, it's got, you know, it explains the velar series, it explains the voiced aspirates, it explains it has an ah vowel. Why not? To say that these things were there for time immemorial? You know, these are all views I hold, and so maybe I'm going to be more sympathetic to them than others.
But I also don't know if you could have, if such a person exists as someone who could reconstruct Proto-Basque entirely in internal evidence, and who knows nothing about Indo-European, so wouldn't be sort of influenced by that.
Yeah.
Like I just,
yeah,
I think I don't know if that person exists, but
I'd be interested to know, because I don't think she really talks about it in this book, how she came to this. Like, did she just start messing with the Basque and then know, you know, once she got it more or less reconstructed, then she noticed that it was similar to Proto-European? Or was she already trying, as she was messing with the Basque originally, to you know, make these kind of, I don't know.
Well, Tony has the best chance of getting in touch with her because he's got, you know, you've got your shiny tenure track credentials you can flash.
I'll write her and let her know that we've done this, and see if she's interested. Who knows? You know, I'm not sure. I mean, she seems to be continuing to work on the problem for, you know, for those. I don't think we mentioned it, but there was at least one follow-up article, a 2021 article in Diachronica, which was more of a kind of more fully worked out version of the statistical chapter that she presented in this book, I think, or
okay.
I don't know if this, maybe that's not a fair way of phrasing, but it was basically the same idea. You apply these statistical methods to calculate language similarity.
Well, that sounds worthwhile.
I shouldn't say that whether it's there's, you know, the sort of the probability that the similarities that you observe between them are due to chance. That's the idea of the method. And I don't know really anything about those methods. I don't, just
Yeah,
not,
the math stuff is beyond me.
kind of outside my domain. So yeah, but yeah, so anyway, I say this just to mention that it seems like something that she's remained interested in, and so, you know, maybe she wants to come talk about it. See.
And which deserves more discussion. I think we all agree. So if we were, we would probably be very interested to talk to some halfway credible people who are talking about her work.
Those people who are doing, like, I'll say this as an appeal to Indo-European, anyone who's trying to do like deep reconstruction of the verbal system, or the, you know, and the related morphosyntax, things like alignment change in the prehistory of like, they should be thinking about this. Like, they should be looking, because they should be looking for, I mean, that's the problem with doing internal reconstruction, is you have no check on the top. Like, you know, you can regularize into the void. And, you know, and that's what some of my colleagues like to do. But this would be a top, like, this would put a new top. And so, and, you know, and obviously there's other tops that can compete with it. As you said, Jackson, it might not be, you know, even if you could believe in macro families, and this might not even be the closest sort of one up there, but it would nevertheless put the top on some tree. So, so anyway, people should be thinking about it.
Yeah. And I think that's a good sort of summation. People should be thinking about this. I would be happy to talk if, you know, we've been talking for an hour and a half. I'll put this on YouTube and 2 people will watch it all the way through to this point. But if, you know,
please comment so we know who the 2 of you are.
Yeah, but I would be interested to talk to Juliette Blevins, or to someone with an informed perspective who's skeptical of this. Either one of those would be interesting. Yeah. Thomas asks, with Afro-Asiatic reconstruction, there's quite a Semitic dominance in the sense the reconstructions lead towards Semitic features a little more because Semitic language has been studied more. Would you say the same is happening here, that Indo-European features gain the spotlight and the reconstruction rather than Basque? I don't think that's really a sin of hers, because so much of her, I mean, 1/3 of this book is just her reconstructing Proto-Basque with Basque. So if that is Indo-European influence creeping in, it's, I think, I don't think she's intentionally doing that.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not calling it, I don't really need to call it a sin.
I mean, the Indo-European that she's operating with is completely uncontroversial. It's just like the Rotmanian type reconstruction. I mean, it's just a phonological reconstruction that is, you know, agreed upon by everyone except for the glottolicists, basically. Yeah. So I would say that, yeah, I think the Semitic thing, just to mention that why the Semitic languages play an outsized role in Afro-Asiatic reconstruction. I mean, it's in part because they're pretty well studied, but also because they're early attested. Like that's the language family that shows up early. And so, like, I don't know, if we didn't have Hittite, and we didn't have Mycenaean and Homeric Greek, and we didn't have Vedic Sanskrit or something, like, and all we had were languages that started being attested, 500 BCE and going forward, then our reconstruction would probably look different of Proto-European. It would be, or at any rate, it would be a lot harder and a lot more controversial.
Absolutely. I mean, it's the same reason why, if you're reading about Germanic historical linguistics, every 5th example is going to be from Gothic, just because it's the only one that's well attested at an early enough stage.
Mm-hmm. Nature of these things. Let's try to get her. I'll try to get her, and we'll see this. And yeah, and we'll talk again. I should probably get going. I have about a million things to get done today, but
yeah, I've got my office hours for my online class coming up. So, all right, gentlemen, thank you so much for your time. Thank you, Patreon, for coming. Thank you, Stoa, for the links. And yeah, for now, good discussion, and all the best to y'all.
Likewise, thanks for chatting, both you guys, and
good to chat with you.